For a while when I was starting out, and honestly still sometimes these days, I relied on my Zoom H5 recorder and its built-in MS capsule for doing a lot of my recordings, both around the house and in the field. But I felt unsatisfied a lot with the output that the recorder gave me raw, so I developed this processing chain to help enhance those recordings and give me more of what I'm looking for. The overall approach here is similar to color grading, where I'll start by doing some correction and neutralizing of the recording to develop a balanced starting point, and then follow that up with the actual grading and applying the style, which in this case is going to be a matter of accentuating the natural characteristics of the source and trying to bring out its best parts, but not change the nature of it too much. So to start off, here's what the recording sounds like raw without any plugins on it. That's decent, I would say. It's got a lot of room tone, and although I positioned the microphone as close to the source as I could get it, it doesn't sound to me as detailed as it could be. So let's dive into the processing chain, and we're going to start off with Pro C, which is doing some peak reduction. Again, this is part of the neutralizing part, so we're trying to get these portions like this big transient here more in line with the quieter transients. You can see it's squashing it pretty hard. It sounds very artificial at this point, but don't worry, it'll get better. Next, we have the SPL Transient Designer. This is doing more of that same process, but in a different way. We're also reducing the sustain in addition to the attack to make a little bit of a contrast between the room tone and the reverb of the room and the actual source, the rice cooker itself. Next, we got Pro L to add some level back up. It's doing peak reduction, but like 0.2. That's nothing at this point. So, following that, we have Ozone. And this is just using the multiband dynamics portion of Ozone. Specifically, we're just doing multiband limiting here. This is to reduce, in this case, just the high frequency peaks in varying amounts for like the mid highs and high highs to sort of do our first stage of spectral flattening, which is then followed up by Unfilter, which does even more spectral balancing and flattening. This is a little bit of magic, but it essentially just like makes the sound more pleasing to the ear by, I think it like applies a Fletcher-Munson curve or something to bring out some of the frequencies that are otherwise being muffled and recreate some of the upper harmonics that might have been lost or weren't there to begin with. And at that stage, I would say that wraps the neutralization. And from this point, we're going to be moving on to grading and applying the style that we're looking for. So this is something I won't always do, but in this case, we're going to use RootOne. And this adds a very subtle amount of some subharmonics, which is sort of creating that proximity effect when you have a microphone very close to something, and it brings out sub-low-end details that you might not otherwise notice. And we're going to follow that up with an SPL Transient Designer again. And I know what you're probably thinking, why would you turn down the attack only to turn it back up later? And the two-stage approach here, basically what we're doing with the first few, with the compressor and the Transient Designer and the limiter, is bringing these high peaks down to the level as the quieter ones. And then with this one, we're turning both the quieter ones and the reduced louder ones up to a more pronounced peak. So we level them out and then we accentuate them. And that's what's going on here. We follow that up with Pro Q. This is also pretty subtle. We're removing frequencies below 46 hertz, which is just mechanical noise that we really don't want. And then cutting the sides at 150 to make the bass more mono. And then we're doing a slight boost at 26K and above. This was recorded at 96, and those microphones do get a little bit of detail in the supersonic range. So this is just going to bring that out a little bit if we want to pitch it down later. If we had a Sankin, it would be more pronounced, obviously, but we got what we got. Then we follow that up with Unveil. And sorry, it's going to start lagging just because this is incredibly CPU intensive, but when we render, you won't hear the stuttering. This is helping to reduce the reverb in the room and add more of that proximity effect. And we have stereo width control. It's still going to be stuttering because of Unveil and Unfilter, both of them running at once, but this is just doing like a tiny bit of reduction to focus it. And finally, just final limiter, adding 2 dB, 2.5 dB of gain, and cutting the ceiling at -2. So that obviously sucks to listen to, so I'm just going to render this out real quick so we can hear the combined effect. So here's our rendered file. Let's take a quick listen. Then AB to the original. I like it more personally. It's certainly more compressed and maybe even a little bit over compressed in some places, but it accomplished our goals of bringing out a lot of the details and making it sound like the best version of itself. So from here, I'm just going to do one last touch. I'm going to open this in RX and do some further reverb reduction. So here's our recording and here's our De-Reverb module. I'm going to select the part that I want to pay attention to and just audition some different reduction curves. That's maybe a bit too extreme. We'll dial it back down a bit. I still hear a little bit of the tail there, so I'm going to extend the length a little bit and bring the reduction back up. That sounds pretty good to me. I could tweak this all day and get it sounding more natural, but I say we leave it there, bake it down. And now we'll head back to Reaper and listen to our final result. Again, AB. That sounds decent enough to me. Now, I'd usually use this as a starting point and tweak different stages of the plugin chain depending on the characteristics of the source recording, but in a nutshell, that's my overall approach, and I guess it just goes to show that you can still get very good quality recordings even with subpar recorders and microphones.